Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video, and the subject of today's video is going to be on the rise and fall of the Joe Johnson Atlanta Hawks. So I will be continuing my rise and fall series that I started on. The last video was on the Pau Gasol Grizzlies. If you want to go back and check that out, feel free. Basically, if you didn't check out the first video in the series, the point of this is to kind of chronicle like why a certain contender rose up to be a perennial threat in their conference, and then ultimately the downfall of that team. And the reason I want to do this series is because I think a lot of people know the history of like NBA champions, like let's say the Big Three Heat, or the Durant Warriors, or the Shaq Kobe Lakers, or the Chicago Bulls with Jordan. But people don't remember the lesser known teams like these Atlanta Hawks or others who were there every year ready to contend, but just never got over the hump. So that is why I'm doing this series, and let's kick it off. I'll be covering the 5 seasons from '07 to 2012. So as you can see here, the setup of the board, I have basic stats on top and then like per person stats below, highlighting minutes per game, field goal attempts and percentage, along with the same for 3 points and free throws, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, points. On the left, you'll see regular season stats for each year, and on the right, you'll see the playoff stats for each year. So starting off in 2007 to 2008, the Hawks basically had been going with a core previous to this of Joe Johnson and Josh Smith. And this year they had brought in a few good pieces like Mike Bibby, and they had drafted Al Horford. And overall, the team with those two additions was looking a lot better. Joe Johnson had a pretty good scoring year, and his field goal percentage wasn't great, but his 3 point percentage you can see was pretty good. Um, Along with that, pretty solid supporting performances from Josh Smith, Williams, Bibby, Horford. Not much in the way of the bench. Childress, I guess, was providing some good stuff, but you can see overall this team had a pretty good regular season as far as everybody stayed healthy except for Mike Bibby, who missed 50 games, which definitely hurt them, but they were good enough to finally get into the playoffs, and they were the eighth seed with one of the worst playoff records ever at 37 and 45. In the playoffs, they played the one-seeded Celtics, and they didn't really have much of a chance, but they did end up pushing this team pretty far. They pushed them to 7 games. Every team won every home game, and if you look at why they didn't win this series, I feel like you can really point to Mike Bibby and Josh Smith. Mike Bibby, his efficiency dropped by 7% as far as field goals, and 3 point percentage, it dropped 9% about, or 8%, I should say. He also went from 14 points a game to 10, and Josh Smith shot under 40% in this series, which is pretty putrid for him. So really, this team struggled from that perspective a lot. Going into the next year, they basically had most of the same core as you can see on the left. They had Joe Johnson, Josh Smith, Mike Bibby, Marvin Williams, Al Horford, and then some supporting bench pieces. And you can see that the record did improve by 10 wins, and I think that can really be attributed to just pieces like Josh Smith growing into his own more, Al Horford really growing into his own more. Um, they also saw some big spikes in their ratings, like offensive rating was pretty good, so was defensive rating. If you compare that to the year before, offensive rating jumped up 6 spots, and defensive rating also did. I think that can be attributed to Josh Smith and Al Horford really improving their defense. Um, and you look at the team overall, no outstanding standout statistical performances by anybody, but just kind of solid contributions across the board. And they did get to the second round this year where Cleveland stomped them. And if you want to look again to the playoffs, why this team struggled, I would have to point to Ronald Murray as one of the parts of it. He was really their sixth man throughout this year, and you can see his efficiency dropped off big time, going from basically 45% from the field to 34%, which is a tremendous drop off for somebody taking 10 or more shots per game, or in the playoffs taking 11 shots per game. Also, something that can be attributed to this was that Al Horford wasn't really super healthy in the playoffs. He was fighting through some injuries, so you'll see his stats were way down and his efficiency wasn't great or anything. Um, It dropped off from around 53% in the regular season to 42% from the field. So he was definitely struggling. But overall, um, Joe Johnson played a bit worse too, but I think that can be attributed more to just being guarded by a guy like LeBron James in the second round. And that's just going to make your efficiency worse, and your shots, the ones that you even do get and make, they're going to be harder to earn, and you're going to expend more energy trying to get them. All right, if we move on to the next year, this is the peak season of this Atlanta Hawks um, tenure, and they won 53 games, which was good enough for the 3 seed. They made it again to the second round where they lost to Orlando. But look at their offensive rating here, second in the league. And I think when I was trying to think about this, it's because they got some really key people in here that were very good contributors to this team in Jamal Crawford, who was a great six man. And I believe he either won Six Man of the Year this year, or it was one of the years he was in Atlanta, but I actually believe it was this one. And then you also got a really good backup point guard in Jeff Teague who came in as well. So between those two, I think those are really solid additions that nobody thought about at the time that much, but they made a big impact for this team. You had pretty typical seasons from your other main guys like Williams, Johnson, Horford, Smith, and Bibby. Bibby was starting to decline a bit here as he was getting more into his mid to early to mid 30s, and his effectiveness was going down. But overall, you had basically the same exact core, but just add in Jamal Crawford and Jeff Teague, which I don't say that that's the whole reason that they improved to 6 wins, but you also look at the factor that basically every person on the team except for Jeff Teague played at least 76, if not 80 or 81 games. That's tremendous health, and I think this is sort of an example of what you get with a team when everybody is healthy and you can kind of maximize your potential, and that's what they did. And they got to the 3 seed. Of course, when they got to the second round, they faced some issues because Jamal Crawford is a streaky player, and his efficiency, as you can see on the right, dropped big time in the playoffs down to 36%. Same with a few other guys, like Marvin Williams, 39% down from 45, 46%. That's a pretty big drop off. And overall, just I think they struggled a lot playing a good defensive team like Orlando, when this was a team that kind of capitalized on having everybody healthy and taking advantage of those teams along the way during a given season who are kind of not trying their hardest on maybe like a Tuesday night in January where it doesn't seem like it's super critical to do well. Those are the nights that the Hawks would try really hard, and that they would blow teams out and do really well because they just wanted to get every possible win that they could. So I think it's a little bit deceiving that their offensive rating was actually as good as it was. And you see Joe Johnson took a huge drop off as well, 46% from the field down to 39% in the playoffs. So they basically just were outgunned by Orlando, and they weren't equipped to face a defensively impactful team like Orlando in a series. Like they weren't equipped to face that level of defense routinely. Moving on to 2010 to 11, they did take a step back this year, dropping down 9 wins. Mike Bibby was really a shell of himself this year. I'd say this is, I believe, his last season with the team. He got traded for Kirk Heinrich midway through. Kirk Heinrich stepped in and provided basically the same thing for this team. Jeff Teague was still the backup point guard. And then you had the supporting cast of still Williams, Crawford, Smith, Joe Johnson, Al Horford. And, I don't want to say it's all on Jamal Crawford or anything, but he did take a little bit of a step back here. And it's not like he cost them 9 wins or anything, but they definitely did take a notable step back. I think this team also started to focus on defense more. As you can see, their offensive rating plummeted. Um, and I believe this was a time when they transitioned coaches, maybe from, if I remember correctly, Mike Woodson to Larry Drew, because I think Mike Woodson had been fired because they were just tired. They were tired of getting swept in the second round, but lo and behold, this year they would also lose in the second round again. And the East was just a lot more stacked this year. You had the Chicago Bulls coming up and rising to win 62 games. You had the Big Three Miami Heat exposing themselves as a huge contender, and then you still had Boston and Orlando. So Atlanta just kind of got lost in the shuffle and fell to the fifth seed. They did actually beat Orlando in the playoffs, and that can be accounted somewhat to Jason Collins, who was really good against Dwight in the first round. You'll see on the right, he only played 13 minutes a game, but he basically was just told go in there and rough up Dwight, and that's what he did. And they were really able to actually neutralize Dwight pretty well in the first round. But again, you look and everybody's efficiency dropped quite a bit in the playoffs, most notably Horford, I'd say, going from 56% from the field in the regular season down to 42%. And again, this is just an example of a team who struggles when they play consistent good defenses more frequently. Like they had to go up against Orlando, which was a good defense in the first round, and then they had to go up against Chicago, which I believe was the best defense in the second round, and they just were kind of getting dogged because they weren't used to going up against good, consistent defenses that frequently. Because in the East, you had a lot of bottom dwellers who would let you run all over them during the regular season. Moving on to 2011 to 12, our last year in the Joe Johnson era, he did leave in free agency, or actually, I guess it was a trade after this, but it was kind of a result of his contract being way too big from a few years prior, so they traded him. But you basically had the same core. Again, this is one of the good things about this team. They were very consistent and very healthy. You had Jeff Teague finally take over the starting role. Josh Smith, Joe Johnson. The only problem with this team was Al Horford basically missed the whole year, and that's what really set them back. And you see, they had 50 wins if you adjust it to a regular 82 game season. And they probably would have won, I'd say 55, if not a couple more, if they had um, Joe Johnson, or excuse me, Al Horford healthy. So they probably would have been more like the 4 seed or the 3 seed, I would think. Again, you had this Larry Drew influence of let's make our defense super good and let offense just come as it will. And so you'll see offense was middle of the pack, but defense was really good. Um, and I think, when I think about this team overall and maybe why they didn't get over the hump, I feel like it was because a lot of times their defense was really solid with Horford, Smith, Pachulia, Marvin Williams, but their offense a lot of times seemed to be let's just play iso ball and we'll just let the shots come to us sort of a thing. And there weren't like specific offensive schemes as much as just like let's just run Joe Johnson isolation or run a play isolation for Josh Smith or just throw it down to Horford in the post and let him do a post move and score. Whereas if they would have come up with some more creative offensive schemes, I think that the team would have found more success. In the playoffs this year, they lost to Boston in the first round, and again, some of the same sort of problems. You have Joe Johnson and Josh Smith's efficiency plummeting. Same with Jeff Teague. Same with Marvin Williams. And again, that comes back to the whole idea of a team who's really isolation heavy for their offense. When those guys have to do isolation in the playoffs, go up against tougher defenses, go up against double teams, go up against guys meeting them in the paint and hitting them harder, you're going to struggle a lot more. And I think that can be attributed to why this Hawks team struggled. And that's really the story of these Atlanta Hawks guys. They were a team who, if I had to sum it up, their main problems were a lack of offensive creativity, too reliant on inefficient isolation scorers, and honestly, just they never had the best player in any series that they lost. Like those years they lost to Orlando, um, Dwight is better than Joe Johnson. The years they lost to LeBron, LeBron is better than Joe Johnson. Same with Boston. Paul Pierce probably even with Joe Johnson, but just when you add in Garnett, Rondo, and Allen, they're better. Same with the Derrick Rose year. MVP Derrick Rose is better than Joe Johnson. I'm sorry. So yeah, I'd say just like being overmatched as far as talent and offense being too reliant on isolation were their main reasons for their downfall. But the reasons for them being good is they had a really healthy team for the most part, and they were really consistent and had good chemistry. And when you have team stability, that helps success as well, as far as building chemistry and being really comfortable with your team overall. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll post this in the playlist of the Rise and Fall series, and if you're interested, check out others. I'm going to continue with the series and be posting more and more. So I'll see you next time. Bye.